Welcome to the Caregiving Podcast. I'm Inga.
And I'm Julie.
And long story short, we have Caregiving. We are two momtrepreneurs who have built an in-home care business from the ground up, guided every step of the way by God's care and fueled by agape love. Almost 14 years later, we felt called to create this podcast as a resource for families with caregiving needs. Whether you care for a family member or are looking for advice on professional caregiving, we want this to be a platform to support you.
Each week, we will come to you with encouraging stories of families who have found the right balance for their loved ones, tips for how to care for them and you, and much more. We hope you continue to join us each week as we share in this exciting new journey together.
Hello, Sunshines, and hello, Julie. How is you today? Did I catch you off guard?
Oh, always.
Were you adjusting your
every
spectacles?
Time. Yes.
It's like a surprise. It's like the first time we've done it every time we do it.
Every single episode, absolutely.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Oh boy. So March is brain injury awareness month.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about that today.
Yeah. It's a heavy topic because it can be so detrimental to people. And so it'll be interesting. We're just going to talk about the basics and the different kinds of brain injury and all that. So it'll be good.
I think it's really interesting. And again, I've said this a million times before, but every time we do topics like this, I learn so much that, you think you know a little bit, but then you really do a deeper dive into it and learn that you don't know much at all.
No diddly.
Don't know diddly.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, so it was supposed to be spring, right? The sun was out yesterday, I do believe. Today it's not so much.
Right.
So what's your favorite springtime event?
Oh, springtime event. Well, my favorite springtime event is when I see a robin and I start to see green grass coming up. Yeah. My favorite event is when we have our first calf, and then my next very, very favorite is when we have our last calf.
Nice.
And we're right in the middle of that right now. So,
yeah,
I'm like in Groundhog Day.
And you got
just every day. We're doing get up, go to work, go home, do chores, check cows.
Yes.
Next day, same thing.
And you got a picture of a robin.
Well,
you were so excited.
I was so
excited.
It
was such a letdown.
Somebody sent me a beautiful picture of a robin, and I was like, "What? You saw a robin? I haven't seen one yet." And she's like, "Oh no, I just took it off Facebook."
Well, I'm underwhelmed.
It's a beautiful picture. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Goodness. I love, my favorite part of spring is when it actually dries up and there's no more mud.
Oh, hallelujah, sister.
It is the worst on the farm. Just the muck and the gross. And
I have several people. You've been having farm shows with your babies like all spring.
Oh, yes.
And I have a few people that want to come over and see my baby calves. I'm like, I can't have you coming over right now because the corral is just terrible.
I've gotten to the point that I'm like, enter at your own risk, wear muck boots. I mean, that's the best I can do for you.
Oh, and the poo is getting to the consistency of almost concrete.
Oh boy.
And so that's when I tend to lose my boots in the crap.
Right.
And so every time I'm
walking. Do you lose a boot every year?
Every year, at least one. And it just ticks me off.
Do you ever get it back? Or
I then have to walk in my socks because I had to reef on it, and I'm not going to put my gross foot back in my boot. It's just a conundrum of mine every spring.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to help with that.
You never had a boot fall off?
I've had a boot fall off, but not all the time. I've thrown a shoe before. I mean, it has happened, but not to the extent that... I think the takeaway is that you do more chores than I do.
No, and the takeaway is cows crap differently than sheep.
Well, this is true. In case our listeners didn't know.
Yeah, the facts of life.
Yes.
Here you go.
Nice. So, Julie, we are actually going to do something a little different with our verses this episode, just because, like you mentioned, it is a very heavy topic, and we just wanted to talk through an article that you found, and it is 5 things that the scriptures teach us about trauma and suffering.
Yeah. It was that we have some really good books also on why we go through the things we go through, because when you're going through such a heavy load, and it's not just brain trauma, anything in your life, so much of it comes back on how we're reacting to it, and also how much of our faith is in God, that he's put this into our lives for whatever reason. And right when you're in the thick of it, you're like, why? None of this makes sense. I'm not having any fun.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think people have a tendency when they go through tough times to do that, to look at it and say, why, God, why are you doing this to me? I don't
then
understand.
They turn mad.
Then they turn mad.
And all of the, guilt, resentment, all of that comes out. And that's really hard because it just compounds. And
what's interesting,
it's never easy.
though, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but I know that my experience has always been, you're in the thick of it. You've got this traumatic situation going on. You don't quite understand. But if you can just remind yourself that, look to God and there is a reason, you will always find out down the road what was the reason for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
at least for me. Not saying that every person has that experience.
I was supposed to learn this.
Yeah, this helped me grow in this area, or I was able to understand this, or I learned more about that. Yeah. Yeah.
And the book that I'll actually get the book and give it to Alyssa so she can put it under show notes. And this is a hospital chaplain that actually has seen a lot of trauma, a lot of sickness, a lot of sadness. And he talks about the people that go through it the easiest or the most accepting of the situation are those that still can find gratitude.
Yes.
And that takes a big person with a ton of faith.
It's hard to do at times.
To be honest, I've had hard stuff in my life. Who hasn't? But I don't know that it's been that hard that I've been tested on my faith.
Right.
And it scares me because I don't want to.
Right.
But some people really seem to get a dose of it and then
Yes.
another dose of it. And they're just like, why?
I find the older I get and the more experience that I have, the easier it is for me to understand that situations that happen that are out of your control and you're not prepared for it, you're not ready for it, it's a hardship, they're easier to accept because you just know that there's a reason for it.
Yeah. Well, you're one of the lucky ones to have had insight enough into yourself and that to be ready to deal with whatever. Because a lot of people are still what they consider blindsided, right?
Yeah. And that's true. And everybody
Yeah.
deals with things differently. But let's talk about these key truths.
Yes. 5 key truths about that the scriptures teach us about trauma and suffering. So the first one is that God is present and in control of our suffering. Firstly, God is present in control of our suffering in times of great suffering and pain. We often feel the farthest from God. Where is he? Has he forgotten me? How could he let this happen? This is also the case in the lives of great men of faith in the Bible. Look at David, Jeremiah, Job. Even Jesus at the height of his pain cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? From our limited human perspective, pain and suffering seems contrary to our idea of a sovereign God who is good and loving. We think that God blinked and wasn't able to stop this traumatic event, or he really isn't a loving God. We forget that Adam chose a sin, and to that we live in a fallen world full of suffering. Suffering should not cause us to question God's sovereignty, as Job so clearly understood. God is sovereign despite our circumstances. He created all things and he controls all things. He allows us to experience the consequences of sin while remaining fully in control of all things, including Satan, who can only bring suffering into our lives if God allows it. God is in control of our circumstances, and he wants to transform us into the very image of his Son.
Yeah. I love that. And for everybody listening, if you want to find the verses that correspond with the information we're sharing, go into the show notes because they're listed on there and you'll be able to reference back to it.
Right.
The second point is that God is good and he cares for us. So God is good and cares for us. We have all heard this statement. How could a loving God allow blank? Fill in the blank with any horribly traumatic event that occurs here on planet Earth. People often use a statement to argue against not only the love of God, but also the existence of God. But God does love us, and that is evident in our redemptive history. The creator of the world made a way for disobedient, powerless creatures to come into an eternal relationship with him. He is patient and gracious. He became one of us, and then he sacrificed himself for us. Self-sacrifice is the ultimate act of love. God is indeed good, and he longs to be in an ever deepening relationship with us.
Number 3 is through our trials and suffering, we have an opportunity to draw closer to God. In James 1, verses 2, we are told to consider it pure joy when we go through difficult times. What kind of strange mental gymnastics does God want me to do? I'm supposed to be happy when I'm in pain? No, not at all. Even Jesus was sad when he went through difficult times. At Lazarus' grave, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Is that it?
Gethsemane.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And on the cross. The third truth we are called to recognize is that through our trials and suffering, we have an opportunity to draw closer to God. During the easy times, we often become self-reliant, forgetting our need for God. It is in the hard times when our faith is tested that we recognize our need for complete dependency on Him. James tells us that persevering through the difficult times develops a mature and complete faith. We are ever being conformed into the image of Christ, and suffering is a necessary part of that transformation.
It's also important to remember that Jesus understands what it is to suffer, right? So that is the fourth truth. We do not worship a distant, unapproachable God. We worship a God that knows what it is to be human and knows what it is to suffer. Just think about Jesus's life for a moment. He didn't experience just one traumatic event during his time on earth. His whole life was full of suffering. The prophet Isaiah told of his suffering hundreds of years before his birth. He was born into unimaginable poverty in a country occupied by a cruel army. He narrowly escaped a mass slaughtering of children that was ordered because of his birth. He was physically assaulted by Satan, persecuted because of his teachings, and thought insane by his family, betrayed by his own disciple. He was deserted by his friends, falsely arrested, publicly humiliated, beaten to the point of death, and then slowly and painfully publicly executed by crucifixion as a common criminal. We can take great comfort in the fact that God can relate to us on our level and that He understands what it is to suffer.
Finally, our identity is not defined by traumatic events or suffering, but is grounded in Christ. God does not see you as a victim. He sees you as his child. The scriptures tell us that as children of God, we were chosen before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless, adopted sons and daughters, lavished with grace, redeemed, forgiven, given spiritual wisdom and understanding, and marked with the Holy Spirit. We are in Christ. We sit at the right hand of the Father. We have his righteousness. We must not allow tragedy or circumstances to define who we are or how we live. We have his very life within us, and we must choose to live out that truth. This was just so well written, and this is by Dr. Matthew Stanford from the Hope and Healing Center and Institute.
Yeah, I love it. So if you want a plethora of verses from today's episode, just look up this article on our show notes and go dive into it, because there's a lot of great information.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Stanford. That's beautiful.
Beautifully done. Yeah. And listeners, if you have any verses that you would like us to share, if you have good news stories, which we will be getting into here in just a second, please email those to the caregivenpodcast@gmail.com. We love to have information to sort through, and we love hearing from you guys.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with your...
Yes, because it's such a heavy topic about brain trauma-ish things. I wanted to talk about something uber, super cool, fancy, funny.
Nice. Well, I did not. So I'm sorry. Mine will be a bit of a bummer, but I think it gets worse before it gets better.
Okay. Basically, the other day, it was on a Sunday, and we were looking for March Madness games or something. And I'll be danged if on ESPN they had corgi racing.
Oh, my gosh.
It was the most hilarious. They had 8 heats of like 10 dogs. So each heat had all of these dogs, and they were racing, and then they were going to have the champion corgi racer. And these dogs were hilarious. Their owners were down at the end trying to give them their favorite ball or have a snack ready for them, whatever it took. But if one of their fellow racers, when hit them, they would just do this. It was hilarious. And those little cute corgi butts.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And they're really fast, but some of them had the zoomies, and it wasn't a straight line zoomie, so they lost. But some of the names were like Chewbacca. Chewbarca. Yeah, Wigglebutt. And the one that actually ended up winning the whole shebang this year was Wrong Way Loki, because last year he had lost because he went the wrong way. So they named him Wrong Way Loki, and now this year they were going to have to change his name to maybe Right Way Loki, because he...
Wrong way, Loki.
There's a huge trophy that's over 4 foot high. So, it's just hilarious. And they interview the owners of the dogs, and, what's the secret sauce? We can't tell you. But anyway, there are, all these websites like Corgi Planet. You can get on there and it's all about corgis and, why do corgi butts float? It's just funny, just so
I happen
lighthearted.
to know a corgi, and I like him an awful lot.
Cal
the corgi.
The Cal.
Yep.
He's adorable. And
He
then
is.
Tommy has one. I can't remember.
And Kostekis have a corgi.
that's
Maybe
right.
two. They got another dog. I don't know if it's a corgi as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Corgis have become super popular lately.
Actually know corgis, don't we?
Yeah, we know a few. Cal the best.
Yeah.
He's the best boy corgi.
Whenever he comes to the office, he sounds like a train.
They're heavy. They're like dense, man. Try picking up a corgi. You better put on your lifting belt and bend at the knees.
Weight is deceiving.
Yes, but he's so loving.
Yeah.
And he's so low to the ground that when he wants to lay with you, I mean, he literally will his whole body weight is just like on you and he pins you to the ground. It's so funny.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
adorable.
I can only imagine. I'm going to have to go watch the corgi races.
It's hilarious.
That'll be
It's the
great
funniest thing
entertainment.
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe I actually stopped my day and watched it.
Oh, well, good. You probably
but
needed that
you
in your
just
day.
can't quit once you start.
Okay, well, this article that I am going to read to you is called Retaining Walls of the Heart by Norma Myers, and it's actually off of Brainline, which is a site that is all about brain injury and PTSD.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, Retaining Walls of the Heart by Norma Myers. So it says, picture a retaining wall, a structural feature that allows you to support landscaping and help prevent erosion. My retaining wall comes with its own definition because it is an emotional retaining wall that I consciously, subconsciously, or both constructed after my sons Aaron and Steven's car accident in 2012. It was built on autopilot mode without a formal blueprint. Emotionally expensive, physically draining, and spiritually challenging, the retaining wall was built, I believe, in hopes of experiencing some normalcy amidst total chaos. For those who haven't had to deal with a tremendous amount of trauma, stress, or pain, it may be difficult to relate to the need to build such protective walls around one's heart. I thought by naming each stone in my retaining wall, it would provide purpose for survival. The anchor stone, the most rare and precious stone of all, was the Aaron stone. It was prestigiously placed to honor my firstborn son, who didn't survive the accident. The next stone was Stephen's, which represented many reminders of the fragility of life. Not only did he have to endure months of therapy due to severe traumatic brain injury he sustained in the crash, but he also had to start learning to live with more challenges than anyone should have to endure. The weight of Stephen's stone underscores his painstaking recovery, but also the reality of his having to carry on in the world without his brother, his best friend.
Oh.
Each of the retaining wall stones hold unique significance because they represent facets of our journey. A big one represented our long-awaited return home after watching Stephen learn how to live all over again, newborn to adult. There's the silent but still excruciatingly loud stone that echoes Aaron's absence. There's the mom stone, shattered but still intact because of faith, strength, and resiliency. And there's the dad stone with its many fissures from day upon day of living without his son Aaron, while also needing to help Stephen navigate and accept his new normal, all of our new normal. There are many beautiful gardens behind retaining walls. While my perennial garden doesn't have one, it does have a keeper, me. I tend to the needs of the garden every season of every year. At the end of each season, I used to get overwhelmed about making sure each plant was pruned back correctly and on time. My awesome counselor gave me some advice that I will always cherish. Instead of looking at the entire garden, look at each plant individually and address that need. Same with weeds. Don't think about how many need to be removed, just pull one at a time. The same can be said for our lives and our hearts. When we address one issue at a time, the big picture seems less daunting. My garden is filled with a variety of flowers and weeds that bloom with each season. This scenario mimics my reality, navigating the ins and outs of TBI, epilepsy, PTSD, grief, and ambiguous loss. Those realities serve as reminders to embrace my counselor's advice. Focus on one flower, one weed at a time, because each offers a lesson. My emotional retaining wall was built for a reason and season. And as healing began, I knew it was time to remove the wall I had created, stone by stone. As the dismantling began, I realized that some of the stones needed to remain, but identified with different labels, such as love, forgiveness, trust, hope, patience, kindness, and peace. And yes, even on the grayest of days, they do blossom and bloom.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
What a beautiful soul.
Yeah. It's hard. Brain injury is hard.
Well, her times two.
Yep.
Because not only did she lose a son to
Yes.
the accident, but then she had to go through all of this with her son.
Yeah.
That is one of those that you have to be really strong
Yeah.
to even survive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And just as we were talking before, it would be probably very easy to fall into that why me, why us, why our family, why my child, why my mom, why, So lean into your Lord and Savior.
Oh my goodness. My goodness. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the human brain. And the human brain is magnificent and complex. The brain is made up of many parts, each with a specific and important function, and controls our ability to balance, walk, talk, and eat. It coordinates and regulates our breathing, blood circulation, and heart rate. It is responsible for our ability to speak, to process and remember information, make decisions, and feel emotions. Every brain is unique, ever changing, and extremely sensitive to its environment.
Well, and did you know that the brain is divided into basically into functional sections that are called lobes?
Right.
So you've got, I'll say them, you point on your head. How about that?
Vanna White.
Okay. So we have the frontal lobe. Oh, wait. Frontal lobe. We have the temporal lobe.
That's the sides.
Yep. The parietal lobe
is right behind the frontal up here.
Yep. The occipital.
A little bit further back.
Cerebellum.
Is that in the base?
The base of it. Okay. And then your brainstem.
Goes down.
Okay.
How'd
so
I do?
You did great. Good job, Vanna.
Thank you. Thank you.
So each lobe has an important and specific function, and we're just going to go through each of them and kind of talk to you about what they're responsible for. So the frontal lobe functions, which again is this front part of your brain, they are responsible for attention, concentration, self-monitoring, organization, expressive language or speaking, motor planning and initiation, awareness of abilities, awareness of limitations, personality, mental flexibility, inhibition of behavior, emotions, problem solving, planning, and judgment. So an injury, if you do, or anyone you know ends up with an injury to the frontal lobe, that might affect an individual's ability to control their emotions, their impulses, their behavior, and it may also cause difficulty in recalling events or speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a very important.
It is very important.
Yeah.
The temporal lobe, that is on the sides, right? It is responsible for memory, understanding language, and then also sequencing, hearing, and organization. So an injury to the temporal lobe may lead individuals to demonstrate difficulty with communication or memory. I always want to say this wrong, but it's parietal, right? Yep. Parietal lobe functions. So that's going to be responsible for your sense of touch, your spatial perception, depth perception, your identification of like sizes, shapes, and colors, and also visual perception. So it makes sense that somebody that would have an injury to that lobe is going to have trouble potentially, probably with their 5 primary senses.
Right.
And then there's the occipital lobe, which that's responsible for your vision. So if you have an injury to your occipital lobe, you're going to more than likely have trouble seeing or perceiving the size and shape of objects.
Okay.
Then if you bounce to your cerebellum, that's your balance and coordination. That is your skilled motor activity and your visual perception. So an injury to the cerebellum might affect your balance, movement, and coordination. And finally, the brainstem is really responsible for some very important things. Breathing, arousal, consciousness, heart rate, sleep, and wake cycles. So the brainstem controls your body's involuntary functions that are essential for survival. So basically your breathing and your heart rate, you have to have those, and those are controlled by your brainstem. So
well, damage to any of them is going to cause significant issues.
Yes. Yeah.
So the functional sections, which are the lobes of the brain, are categorized by side, the right side and the left side. And you've also often heard people say, I'm a left side or I'm a right-sided person. Well, what happens is if you split the brain down the middle to 2 equally sized parts, they are not the same and do not carry the same functions.
Right.
So not only are the lobes like that, but then it's cut in half.
Yes.
So how complex?
Yes. Well, you always hear, like you're saying, always, are you right-brained or are you left-brained?
Yeah. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, while the left side controls the right side of the body.
Isn't the human body just amazing?
I don't even understand it. I don't even understand that when God was making this, how he thought about that. And then he made people that were interested enough in the phenomenon to then figure it all out.
Yes, that is just wild to me.
Amazing. Each side is responsible for different functions and general patterns of dysfunction. They may occur depending on the side of the brain stemming and sustaining an injury. So we're going to talk about the traits of that.
Let's get after it. So left side, we'll talk about it, and then we can decide, are we left side or right side?
Oh, boy.
Right brain. Left brained or right brained?
Righto.
Okay. Left side traits: analytical, logical, precise, organized, detached, literal.
Well, that's pretty easy. That's you.
It's like, well, we might not even have to go to the second one. Okay. So if you have an injury to the left side of your brain, it can cause you difficulties in understanding language or receptive language, difficulties in speaking or verbal output, so expressive language, catastrophic reactions like depression and anxiety, difficulty speaking, impaired logic, sequencing difficulties, and decreased control over your right-sided body movements.
Interesting. So the right side traits are creative, imaginative, intuitive, conceptual, empathetic, and figurative.
Yeah. Any guesses on what Julie is?
Oh, yeah.
They do
hilarious.
say opposites attract.
Well, that's so funny because you're the left side, I'm the right side. And that's kind of what this whole partnership for
really
15
is.
years, we've done this business. And because we have, between the two of us, we have a full brain.
What a revelation.
That's awesome. Okay, injuries of the right side of the brain can cause visual spatial impairment, visual memory deficits, left neglect, which is inattention to the left side of the body. Isn't that something?
That's interesting.
Decreased awareness of the deficits, altered creativity and music perception, loss of the big picture type of thinking, decreased control over the left-sided body movements. Wow. Wow.
Just wild.
Yeah.
I'm going to be thinking about it all day long. Like, okay, when I'm moving my right hand, it's my left brain at work, right?
I know. It makes you really stop and think about it.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is talk about different brain injuries.
Sure. Like classifications. They classify them as either traumatic or non-traumatic, right? Mm-hmm. And then they also can be classified as mild or moderate or severe, and that's going to indicate the initial severity of the injury. Other terms such as diffuse or penetrating, they may be used to describe the type of injury, and then we're going to talk about the most commonly used terms. So take it away, Jules.
Okay. A diffuse axonal injury can be caused by shaking or strong rotation of the head, such as shaken baby syndrome, or a rotational force such as with a car accident. Injury occurs because the unmoving brain lags behind the movement of the skull, causing brain structures to tear. Mm-hmm. There's an extensive tearing of nerve tissue throughout the brain. This can cause brain chemicals to be released, causing additional injury. The tearing of the nerve tissue disrupts the brain's regular communication and chemical processes. This disturbance of the brain can cause temporary or permanent widespread brain damage, coma, or death. A person with a diffuse axonal injury could present a variety of functional impairments depending on where the shearing or tears occurred in the brain. Mm-hmm. So honestly, any kind of bounce to the head. Mm-hmm. So is this when you were talking about like boxing, sports,
yes,
you know,
so many,
that kind of thing?
Yeah, and next I'm going to talk about actually concussions and what they consider to be like mild traumatic brain injury. But yeah, there are a lot of those like high impact sports that are you know pretty hard on the noggin. So I think that's why they work and continue to work on that protective equipment. Yeah. Right. And require that people use it other than boxing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
well, the gloves, is that what's supposed to be the protective equipment? I don't know. Oh my gosh. I have to tell you this story. And I'm just trying to bring a little humor because this is not an easy topic. But when my brother when we were younger, we had family friends in the Big Fork area. And one year for Christmas, one of the boys that was close to my brother's age, he'd gotten boxing gloves for Christmas, right? And so he and my brother were going to box, and he was so excited, and he was like, you know, but I get to use my boxing gloves. And my brother was like, well, I'll take that because he's getting hit with a boxing glove and the other kid's getting hit with a fist. Oh.
Did it work better for him?
I'm sure. Not for the kid that was wearing the boxing gloves. And I'm not sure that kind of activity can be sanctioned anymore these days with kids. But, you know, that was back in the day.
The other thing that I have seen on social media recently is, and I don't remember what they call it, but it's considered a new sport. The slapping thing. It's so dumb. But two people.
Yes.
And there's a ref.
Yep.
They will stand there and they take turns slapping each other. And I have seen one slap. The person stands there and they just
crumple,
drop.
just knocks them right out.
It's
insanity to me.
Why would you do that?
I do not know.
It hurts my face just to watch them because they're just, I mean, they just line up.
Yep.
Bam.
I can't even imagine. I will not be participating in that sport. Not that I participate in any sport, but definitely not that one.
Well, and that's what this diffuse axonal injury is. And some of us are putting ourselves out there for a little bit more risk.
Oof, duh.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so back to concussions and mild traumatic brain injuries. A concussion can be caused by direct blows to the head, gunshot wounds, violent shaking of the head, or a force from like a whiplash style injury. Both closed and open head injuries can produce a concussion, and a concussion is the most common type of traumatic brain injury. So concussion is caused when the brain receives trauma from an impact or a sudden momentum or movement change. The blood vessels in the brain may stretch and cranial nerves may be damaged. A person may or may not experience a brief loss of consciousness, not exceeding 20 minutes. A person may remain conscious but feel dazed or punch drunk. A concussion may or may not show up on a diagnostic imaging test, such as a CAT scan. Skull fracture, brain bleeding, swelling may or may not be present. A concussion can cause injury resulting in permanent or temporary damage, and it may take a few months or to a few years for the concussion to heal.
And like high school sports nowadays, one time when Callie was playing basketball, she fell and bonked her head on the floor, and they pulled her so fast. And they did a concussion baseline on her test, and then she was out for at least, I think the minimum you could do is like a week. And then you still had to pass all of the tests before they let you go back. And this was for high school basketball. But I know that they do it nowadays with football, all of the sports. And they take it so incredibly serious. Yeah.
Because the damage can be irreversible if not dealt with.
So a contusion is a bruise, bleeding on the brain caused by a force of a blow or jolt to the head. A contusion can be the result of a direct impact, and large contusions actually need to be surgically removed. So what is it, a big blood clot?
Sounds like it.
That's terrible.
Yeah. So a coup or counter coup injury, this describes contusions that are both at the site of the impact and on the complete opposite side of the brain. This occurs when the force impacting the head is not only great enough to cause a contusion at the site of the impact, but is also able to move the brain and cause it to slam into the opposite side of the skull. So that's a pretty big impact.
Have you ever watched on the Nature Channel when like the bighorn sheep, the rams hit? And I mean, just the impact and the noise is enough to make you do a jolt. But evidently what they do is God gave them like 2 layers of protection. And so they have more. But they still stand there and shake their heads and look dazed.
Well, our sheep will do that. Our ewes will fight like that. And it's so interesting to watch because sometimes it just is for no reason at all. You'll just like look out in the pasture and somebody's in a spat, and they're literally butting heads. But it's interesting. Some sheep have the personality, or at least ours, they don't like that. So they will literally, if there are 2 that are fighting, they will like weave themselves in and out of it and try to break it up or try to move one the other way.
It's a lot of referees going on.
It is really interesting to watch. But man, when they hit the sound, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much force.
Yeah. So literally some of them, I don't know if it's 2 sacks or 2 layers or what there is, but there's another layer of protection there
for them.
But those rams, they can have 30 to 50 pounds of horn on them. And then they're massive. It's just...
I've even seen things where like deer or elk or where they fight and they'll get tangled up with each other and one will literally be wearing the other. The other will die and they just carry them around. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Second impact syndrome is also a recurrent traumatic brain injury, which can occur when they sustain a second traumatic brain injury before the symptoms of the first traumatic brain injury can have healed.
So that's why Callie didn't get to go back and play basketball just in case she bonked her head again.
The second injury may occur from days to weeks following the first. Loss of consciousness is not required. The second impact is more likely to cause brain swelling and widespread damage. So... all of you motocrossers out there,
listen up. Mama Julie is talking.
These are the hardcore sport people that they don't want to take enough time to heal.
Yes.
But this is why it's imperative to do that. Because death can occur rapidly, emergency medical treatment is needed as soon as possible. The long-term effects of recurrent brain injury can be muscle spasms, increased muscle tone, rapidly changing emotions, hallucinations, and difficulty thinking and learning. Boy, you can really mess yourself up if you don't let yourself heal 100%.
Yeah. It's really important. You have to take it seriously. Cannot mess around.
Wow.
So a penetrating injury, this is one that occurs to the brain from the impact of like a bullet or a knife, other sharp objects that actually force the hair, skin, bone, fragments from an object into the brain. Objects traveling at a low rate of speed through the skull and brain can ricochet within the skull, which widens the area of damage. A through and through injury occurs when an object enters the skull, goes through the brain, and exits the skull. Through and through traumatic brain injuries include the effects of the penetrating brain injury, plus additional shearing, stretching, and rupture of brain tissue. Firearms are the single largest cause of death from traumatic brain injury.
Does this bring up any of your true crime
Yes,
stories?
all of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've seen pictures of an x-ray of like an arrow
Yes.
when somebody was out hunting or whatever, and it's like the x-ray shows
Yes.
the end of it and the front of it, and in the middle there's a brain.
There's an arrow through the brain.
Ugh,
Yeah.
gives me a headache.
We have to take care of these things. And
Our beans.
I know that there's, jokes and things about helmets and blah, 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 but it is so important. Like my mom was riding her bike. This was several years ago, riding her bike, and she was out with a friend, and they had a miscommunication on what was happening and where they were going. And I think mom thought the friend was turning, but she was actually stopping. And so mom collided into her and actually tipped over. And even a tip over caused just tremendous damage to her body. And then also, she was so thankful to have had that helmet on.
Wow.
We got to protect Grandma Jean's little noggin.
Yeah. Well, and that's the topic of helmets is really interesting, because all of us my age are like, we survived.
Helmet schmelmet.
We survived.
Yes.
Because, how many hours and miles and hours, all of it,
Right.
was I on a horse and
Yes.
never once had a helmet. However, there was one time that my saddle slipped and I conked my head on the ground, and I was goofy.
Yeah.
And I don't remember much until we finally got home, and that was a couple hours later.
Yeah.
And the little baby things that I remember happening are comical.
Yes.
Because
You didn't have a long-term damage or effect from it, right?
Right. But I remember standing up from falling off the horse.
Yeah.
And then I remember we stopped at the Nirada bar, and I had a Coke and a Snickers. And then
You're like, I'm going to fall off this horse more often if I get a Coke and a
treat.
Snickers.
But anyway, I don't remember the rest of that whole time period. And I think almost that's on purpose, so you don't remember a trauma.
Oh, I would think so. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
different. And I think a lot of the reason why helmets are becoming more of a thing also is as we evolve and our equipment gets better and faster. And you know what I mean? I think we're doing crazier things than we were back when you and I were young.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when it comes to those at-risk sports.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm meaning.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
Abusive head trauma, which is that shaken baby syndrome.
Oof.
And it's a terrible, terrible thing. That is a violent criminal act that causes traumatic brain injury. Abusive head trauma comes when the perpetrator aggressively shakes a baby or
When
a
the
young
water
child.
perpetrator?
Perpetrator. Did I say that wrong? Goodness. Perpetrator. The forceful whiplash-like motion causes the brain to be injured, and you hear of these tragic stories every once in a while the news. Blood vessels between the brain and the skull rupture and bleed. The accumulation of the blood causes the brain tissue to compress, while the injury causes the brain to swell. This damages the brain cells. It can cause seizures, lifelong disability, coma, and death. Irritability, changes in eating patterns, tiredness. A baby experiencing such symptoms needs immediate emergency medical attention.
That is just the worst.
The saddest.
Thing. Yeah. Locked-in syndrome. So locked-in syndrome is a rare neurological condition in which a person cannot physically move any part of their body aside from their eyes. The individual is conscious and able to think, but vertical eye movements and eye blinking can be used to communicate with others and operate environmental controls. That's would be my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm very claustrophobic, and
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
And then you have your closed head injuries, and those are injuries to the brain caused by an outside force without any penetration of the skull. With a closed head injury, when the brain swells, it has no place to expand. This can cause an increase in intracranial pressure, which is the pressure within the skull. As the brain swells, it may expand through any available opening in the skull, including the eye sockets. When the brain expands through the eye sockets, it can compress and impair the functions of the eye nerves. For instance, if an eye nerve, like a cranial nerve 3, is compressed, a person's pupil, which is the darker center of the eye, it's going to appear dilated or big. This is one reason why medical personnel may monitor a person's pupil size and intracranial pressure. I always knew you were supposed to watch pupil after somebody bonks their head. Yeah. I never knew why.
Right.
So that is wonderful.
No, I'm glad to know that.
Yep.
Yeah. So when it comes to traumatic brain injuries, we've had some clients with that, and it's been different degrees.
Yes.
Because we have talked about the one gentleman that became very aggressive and mean. We had another gentleman that was pretty independent, but his logic was very impulsive, and it got him into trouble with like the law. And he could drive, he could do these things, but we were there to help him with the logical day-to-days.
Yes.
And then then I just had a personal friend this week, a young man. We've known him since he was a little guy. He got into a logging accident. And when I first heard about it, I just was devastated because they said multiple head fractures, face fractures. He's actually doing incredibly well. They flew him to Salt Lake City. He's evidently awake, talking, still in a world of hurt. But what a blessing.
Absolutely.
Because you and I too closely know that it can be easily the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and think about, we had a nurse that worked with us here, and her son many years ago had gotten into a motor vehicle accident, and it seemed pretty desperate in the beginning, but he has recovered and thriving. And so, and then we've had clients that have been like the happiest guys on the planet with TBIs. So it just impacts everybody differently. And, depending on where in your brain box you get injured.
So one of the things that we didn't talk about, because we're talking traumatic brain injury, really brain injuries, is like if you have a stroke or you, where does it hit you?
Yeah.
And then also MS will hit different areas of the brain, and then Alzheimer's. Where in the brain is Alzheimer's affecting you?
Like what's
because if you get it in the frontal, it's a different set of behaviors and what it does to you versus other spots in the brain. It's very much such a big mass up there that controls so much that we take it for granted.
Yes. And I guess it's probably a good thing that there are so many different areas of it, so that, if you don't lose everything.
Right.
And I was thinking about it as we were talking, and you say strokes. So when we have someone that has like left side, this is my left side weakness, then it probably was on their right side brain that was impacted.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same thing. We just had a gentleman that had a stroke, and he is more impacted on his left side, which on a stroke, it typically is the left side for whatever reason. But so it must have been right-sided injury.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So much. This is just the very basics.
Tip of the iceberg.
And this is, there's websites out there that are crazy full of information.
Yes.
And this is from the traumatic brain injury website that we got this information, and there's just so much to learn.
And I think it's the takeaway for me is just always do the little things that you can do to help protect yourself. So wear that seatbelt, right? Just take care of your brain.
Yeah.
It's crucial. It's critical.
Yeah. We do know a couple of families intimately where they've had kiddos that got into motor vehicle accidents, and they're still to this day dealing with the impact of that.
Yes.
And it doesn't just impact the person with the brain injury. It impacts the whole family, the whole set of friends. So it's really tragic. So that's going back to why we did all of the verses for our verse of the week is that we're hoping that everybody that is involved just understands that there's a lot going on, and to be supportive to your families that that are going through this traumatic stuff.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. So in summary, brain injury is unpredictable in its consequences. Brain injury affects who we are and the way we think, act, and feel. It can change everything about us in a matter of seconds.
Yep.
It's really kind of scary.
It's devastating.
Yeah. The most important things to remember are a person with a brain injury is a person first.
Yes.
I love that.
I love that too.
You cannot not ever think
You
otherwise.
are a person first.
No two brain injuries are exactly the same.
That is also very true.
Huge. The effects of a brain injury are complex and vary greatly from person to person. And the effects of a brain injury depend on factors such as cause, location, and severity.
Yeah.
Quite often when I'm dealing with people and their loved one has Alzheimer's, which is a brain thing, the one thing that I tell them that is ironic because it actually brings them a lot of like an aha moment where I'll say to them, just so you know, the only constant you have now is change. And they just go, thank you. I needed to hear that. And just that simple little phrase just gave them so much peace.
Yep, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you wrap us up or show us out, whatever. Give us a grandma saying. What do you have for us today?
This one has said, don't do a rain dance if you don't see clouds. So basically, this gal used to tell her boys something similar. It said, when they were growing up, it said, say what you mean and mean what you say. Again, I'm reminded of the Bible verse, Proverbs 25:14. Whoso boasteth himself, this is all those words. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. So don't do a rain dance if you don't see clouds.
Nice.
So there you go.
Well, I think that is it for the day. So peace out, Girl Scouts.
Have a good day.